Good morning, everyone. We're just letting everyone in through the waiting room. So welcome to our webinar, our special webinar this month. We're just giving time for the technical stuff to work and everyone to flow in. So please give us a moment or two. It's great to see some Victorian heads in here today as well. It's not just especially for Queensland. So welcome everyone. It's just taking a little bit of time because it's Natasha, you're a very popular woman. Everyone wanted to come and see you. So it just takes a bit of time for it to come through. Okay, so for those who hear my webinars regularly, I always like to reward those who are on time. So we will crack on and get started. In the background, people continue to come in. So good morning, everyone. Welcome to our special event today. We've got the great pleasure of having the QBCC coming along, and in particular Natasha Denise, who is the Director of Financial Standards and Investigations with the QBCC. I've been with them a very long time, Natasha, nearly 30 years. Has a massive experience in looking after all of this type of area. So welcome very along today. The focus today will be obviously to for those listening is to have a look at where QBCC sits, talking particularly insolvency, given that this is a Jonge Reid webinar, but more looking at the requirements and the compliance and all the factors around QBCC. For everyone who may have questions, there is a chat box that you can put your questions in. Natasha and I will focus on working through some of the stuff that we want to talk about today. But please put your questions up and we will have time to do it. Natasha is more than happy to answer questions. If they are too specific and it might get involved in an individual licensee to too much detail, Natasha has said she will take that offline. Or if it is a technical question beyond her today, again, she will take that offline and then we can come back with some answers as we need to. But the conversations I've had with Natasha, there is very little chance much for you. She won't know from a legislative point of view, but not that I'm putting her under pressure.
No pressure at all.
Okay. Before we get into specific questions, Natasha, did you want to sort of have a bit of an opening where you fit in the business, how that all ties together and all that sort of stuff?
That would be lovely. Thank you. And thank you for the opportunity to present today. So the area first off, I should go back a step. QBCC, Queensland Building and Construction Commission. We are the regulators of the building industry in Queensland. For our interstate counterparts, which Ashley has mentioned, there's a few on board this morning. You would probably be aware that Queensland is the most highly regulated building industry in the country, rightly or wrongly. We don't set the law. QBCC doesn't set the law. We're essentially the police officers of the building industry. The law is set for us and we enforce that law. Someone obviously does the wrong thing and a new law is created to prevent that. That's why we've got a whole range of laws available in Queensland. The area that I cover off on covers 4 distinctive areas. So my forte lands within the annual reporting cycles, lodgements of, and the financial requirements. So the financial statements that are provided either through audits or annual reporting. We've also got our trust compliance team. They head up the project trust accounts and retention trust accounts. So if anyone has needs information on that, I'm happy to delve into that. We have our money's owed complaint process. So a licensee needs to pay their debts as and when they fall due. There is a process that involves that. And then we have our exclusions part for liquidations and administrations, and I think we're going to cover off on a little bit of that. So they're the 4 areas that are predominantly in my remit that I can cover off on any information.
There's probably not a whole much more left of QBCC outside of that.
There is definitely a whole lot there. Queensland's the only state that has the financial requirements, so it is quite unique to our state.
Yeah. So, and that leads me in, I guess, to, we'll talk about the insolvency, which I know a lot of people will be interested in, but let's start from the beginning, I guess, and talking about the minimal financial requirements. It's obviously, well, may not be obvious, but it probably is that those are quite strict rules and strict things that businesses need to stick in. But can you just give an overview of what that actually looks like for those who may not be that au fait with it?
Yep, sure can.
Yeah.
So the minimum financial requirements essentially cover three aspects. So your current ratio, your current assets, current liabilities, minimum of 1 to 1. The net tangible assets, so your bottom line essentially of a licensee, less any weird and wonderful things like goodwill and franchise fees and things that aren't actually tangible. We take them out. That leaves you with a net tangible asset figure. And that net tangible asset figure would then set a maximum revenue for what that licensee can undertake or earn in a financial year.
Right.
So those two things are linked. The net tangible assets and the maximum revenue are linked. Essentially, there's no point giving a licensee $5 million maximum revenue if they've only got $5 in their back pocket. So we need to ensure that a licensee can take on those contracts and have the working capital behind them, which is why those two things are married up. So that's essentially what the financial requirements are captured within Queensland, and all the licensees that contract with the public enter into contracts in either their own name or a company name are required to meet those financial requirements at all times.
And this is ignorance on my behalf, as we generally only see it at the back end. But how often is that? Is that an annual monitoring? Is it quarterly monitoring?
So if you get to know me well enough, Ashley, you'll know I don't have a very good poker face. And I have actually been asked, and I offer my humble apologies to all the people in this crowd. I have been asked by an accountant how often they have to do annual reporting. It is annual, and again, I didn't come across with a very good poker face when I answered that question. Licensees are required to lodge information annually. So most of our licensees, we've got they're split into different categories. So we've got categories 1 to 3, which is up to 30 million. There's around about 10,500 of them. Most of them have the financial year end date of 30 June. And we require them to provide, at a minimum, internal management accounts by 31 December each year. Our larger end of town, category 4 to 7, so turnover of 30 mil and above, we've only got 650 of them, but they're our national and international companies mainly. Some of them have financial year end dates of 31 December. Some have financial year end dates of 30 June. So they have varying annual reporting days. They may have a 31 May date. They may have 31 December date to report to us, and they're based on general purpose accounts. No exemptions there. They're high end. We need to make sure that they have the proper tests and checks over them. They turn over 30 mil and above. That's quite substantial. Yep. And then we have our smaller end, SC1 and SC2s, turnover up to 800,000, very low risk, but there's 50,000 of them, so a fair quantity of them. They don't have to provide any documents other than a 3-page form that says, what are my assets, what are my liabilities, what's my turnover.
So, and I assume these numbers were set as part of the regulation, or is there a regular update on what is the good ratios and good numbers, or is it set by legislation?
The minimum, the 1-to-1 ratio, that's set by legislation. The requirement to have net tangible assets that cover your maximum revenue, that's also set by regulation. We would say, well, I guess going back that one step, the minimum financial requirements are in place to ensure that the building industry in Queensland is financially sustainable. It's not our role, and it's a common misconception in the industry that it's QBCC's role to stop someone going broke, someone going into insolvency. That's not our role. We can't do that. Yep. Ashley, I can't stop you from buying 10 jet skis. I can't stop mismanagement in a company. We can't do that.
Yeah.
Unless QBCC was a director of those 60,000 companies. So we can't prevent that from happening. What the minimum financial requirements are in place for is to minimise the damage. So because we're aware of things a lot earlier now, and we check that information at least once a year, we can establish whether there's trends that head in that downward spiral and get on the front foot earlier and prevent damage to the industry. So that's the reason for the financial requirements being in place.
Yeah. Okay. And I know through our sort of pre-conversations leading in today that you talk about that you've got some on watch and that they're keeping an eye on some. That's obviously is that just on the back of the annual that they're very close to the border, so they get an orange flag or
we have all the annual reporting information gets fed into our system, and we have bells and whistles at the back end, which will trigger some stuff. That's just the annual reporting is just literally based off your current ratio, your net tangible assets, and your maximum revenue. It's a quick financial health check once a year. A lot can happen in a 12-month period, though. So the annual reporting part is that yearly cycle. However, we're also privy to a whole lot of information at the back end. We have intel that will say whether someone's trading outside their terms with suppliers in the industry. We have intel that says whether you're in default to Telstra or ATO or whoever. We know if you've got a court action. We know if you have a winding up application. We know if you've got defective work, money, incomplete work. We know if you've got a money's owed complaint. So we can and will take action outside of that annual reporting cycle and get more current information to, again, minimise the risk to the industry.
Right, and I think that we'll get into the compliance a bit more, but I know that since the ATO's had the power to lodge defaults for tax debt, that's often been one that's been quite hidden from all creditors and from all regulators because it has been well and truly hidden. But since that
not anymore,
no. So it's certainly that's and we've had I've done other webinars where we've talked in detail about this credit reporting for the ATO. Interestingly, with the ATO, unlike everyone else, as you know, they've got the ability to remove it once a plan is in place and all that sort of thing. So when that flags to you, and then the director, do you have to wait for it to be removed by the ATO before you'll take the flag off, or as soon as you know that that's there?
No. So we'll reach out to that licensee and say, we have some concerns, for example. We are aware that you're in default to the ATO. We'll receive or request their current financial information, and that will determine whether or not there's other concerns there or whether it's just isolated to the ATO. Yep. And what we'd be looking for in that scenario is the repayment arrangement with the ATO.
Yeah, okay. All right.
Because there's one person you shouldn't ignore, and that's the tax man.
Yeah, it's interesting. Yeah, the tax man probably is problematic, but they're certainly not the most dangerous of creditors. But they can certainly cause some grief.
Yeah.
When we talking about sort of you flag someone and then you're trying to get extra information, what are some of the regulatory tools and enforcement actions that you've got available for businesses that are being flagged by you?
So that is a really, really good question and a very common question. If you recall when I said licensees need to meet those financial requirements at all times, if they don't meet the financial requirements at all times, that becomes a may for us. So what we do about it is a may. We may take action, we may not. So we had a chat offline just earlier to the webinar, and I mentioned that QBCC, quite similar to the ATO, we're a risk-based regulator. We regulate those, or we have oversight of those 60,000 licensees. Not only is it not feasible for us to take action on 60,000, it's also not appropriate. It's not appropriate in circumstances where there is low risk compared to a licensee that may be a higher risk. So we allocate our resources accordingly. We'll chase where the high risk is. The low risk is obviously low risk. So we will take a number of things into account before we lead out with regulatory action. So we will look at what that risk is. And I think I mentioned some of them. Do you have incomplete work? Do you have defective work? Have you had past breaches with us where you haven't rectified your position or rectified it and then you're back on our radar again? Are you large or are you small? Is the deficiency of your position small or large? And do you have a plan to come back into compliance? And that's the thing that we're really chasing. So we will try and establish whether or not you have the ability to fix that issue in a reasonable period of time. What we won't usually take into account is a licensee that says, yes, I'm having some issues and I'm $200,000 short of where I need to be, but I've got future profit coming in from our contracts. We won't take that into account because we're involved in the building industry and we know full well that the profit from your next jobs may not fix the issues from your previous jobs. And that's probably not a good way to run your business either. You only need one hiccup and it becomes a very big hole that you can't get out of. So what we'd be looking at is, are you forgiving loans? Are you entering into payment arrangements with the people that you need to, your creditors, your suppliers? Are you forgiving loans if you've taken money out of the company? Are you injecting that back in, or do you have the ability to inject that back in? If we can't establish that plan to come back into compliance in a reasonable period of time, we may act on that risk and say, we will pause you and suspend the license until such time as you can. If that doesn't fix the problem, that may end up in a cancellation. We do have other tools as well where we could issue a license condition on the license. But we're very, and that may mean, no new work. The licensee can't take on any new work until they've satisfied those concerns with us. But we are very aware that a license condition or a license suspension is public facing. So consumers will see that, and that can then cause a self-fulfilling prophecy where the licensee may be experiencing financial difficulty, but our action has actually pushed them into insolvency, and that's what we don't want.
Yeah, so that was a question I just made note of. That putting a pause on, how many times can you pause? Not how many times per licensee, but if you pause a business, how often do they come back from that pause? Because once a business stops the ability to earn an income, which is driven by the license, it would be very hard to rectify the problem, I would have thought.
It depends on the nature of the business, whether they've got and again, suspending a license is a big step for us. We don't do that without taking into account all of those things that we need to. And we are completely aware that there are stakeholders at stake. If we do suspend a license, such as employees of that company, they need to feed their families, but they also need to pay their debts. So we need to weigh that balance up. So if we suspend a license that has taken a fair step to get to that stage as it is, sometimes they are in a place where they can't come out of that. And we will support them exiting out of the industry and make no apologies for that, because they may have defective work where homeowners are at stake. They may have suppliers that aren't getting paid, subcontractors that aren't getting paid, so we'll exit them out of the industry. If they have the ability, though, to again forgive loans, inject capital, seek external financing, or even get really good professional advice on how to rectify that position, that's what we'd be looking for.
Yeah. So, I think it obviously in some of the ones that we see, they've been paused and then they go, well, I can't get out of it. So that's when they come and see us, and it can drive a lot to insolvency once that starts to happen, rather than trying to drive your way out. And please don't get me wrong, I don't think future profits is a way of fixing a problem either. So.
And I would ask the question, and we look at the liquidators' reports as well when that does happen. I'd ask the question, are they insolvent before we actually suspend it?
Well, and quite often that's the case. They are, yes. Yeah, without a doubt. Yeah. I'm not saying you've created the insolvency event.
It's a fine line to balance, though.
Yeah.
Completely accept that.
Yeah. Okay. So the how I get again a question without notice or even knowing the answer, which they say you should never do.
No, you should never work with children and animals. I thought that was illegal.
Well, that too. Um, the in terms of like how often are you in that with everything that's happened in the last 5 years? There's obviously a very high insolvency rate. On top of that insolvency rate, are you got a very high suspension rate or pausing rates at the moment, or are you finding that they're just dropping off the bottom anyway, and then you're just looking after the rest? Like
There is, there's
what's
actually
happening in your marketplace?
there's quite few, thankfully, where they head into insolvency without us actually being aware of the issues.
Right.
The only things that we can put on the public register is a suspension or a license condition or a cancellation. We have all these other tools in place, though. We can request internal management accounts, we can commence a financial audit, we can do show cause notices, we can do an active financial monitoring between QBCC and the licensee, where we get monthly internal management accounts. None of that is publicly facing, so the public isn't aware that we're doing these things in the background.
Yeah.
There'd only be, I would say, if we had 10 liquidations in, let's say, I don't know, a month, which we don't, thankfully, there would be 0.5 that we're not aware of prior to them going into liquidation. Usually we've got action underway, and that has either led to them because they were insolvent to start off with. There's very, very few, thankfully, that blindside us.
That's handy to know that the regulator is seeing it early enough. It's just whether you can actually do something before it's too late. Yeah. So let's talk about the insolvency side. And I think one thing again in our sort of preparing for today, one of the first comments you made to me was about when we talk about the different forms of insolvency and what QBCC can do. You're very much restricted by the legislation. So which I found fascinating in some ways that, you know, we talk about VAs and DOCAs and businesses coming out of it. But the VA and DOCA is still considered an event under the legislation, so you have no choice.
So also receiver manager.
So receiver manager. So let's start before we get into the SBR and why that's a little bit different. I think it's really important to know that it was about 1991, I think your legislation's based.
It's recent, isn't it? It's new.
So very recent legislation. So that's why they don't know about SBRs, because they
correct, and that is exactly the reason that SBRs aren't factored into the exclusion provision, because the law didn't think about SBRs 30 years ago.
No. So when and I know I've over the years I've said this is that surely someone can look at this logically and go, we can actually bring this business out and give it back its ratios. But you don't have that flexibility with a lot of it, do you?
And that is the predominant reason why we don't see a lot of dockers or administrators. They go straight to liquidation because the outcome is unfortunately still the same. The law says, and it's very stringent now, if you appoint a liquidator or an administrator or a receiver manager, and it is a construction company and that event has happened within the last 2 years, we must cancel the license. It's not a may, we must. So if there's an administrator appointed, a liquidator, you're obviously dead in the water. An administrator also has that same outcome. So there is not much utility to appoint an administrator in Queensland if you're planning to get that company out of the water, because unfortunately the company will be cancelled regardless by law. Yeah. I have actually presented to an insolvency management committee for the chartered accountants very late last year, and we discussed this topic as well. They're agitating to the federal government and also the state government to take that part out of Queensland's legislation, to take the administrating part out of Queensland's law, and to allow that to be a discretionary piece, which is similar to what we do for SBRs. The issue is, though, that QBCC has not just creditors at stake, we also have homeowners at stake. So if a company that's in administration can't actually complete those houses, then it's the homeowners that are at risk. So there's not a lot of other regulatory organisations that have the creditor aspects, suppliers and subcontractors, employees, superannuation, things like that. We also have the consumer aspect that we need to weigh up as well. So it places a little bit more risk for administrators because of that insolvency if homeowners can't get their homes completed.
Yeah. And again, the surely comment without understanding the legislation is surely if you can bring it back out of administration, then it allows the business to finish the home.
Hang on.
But that legislation, it's just, quite frankly, it's impossible for you to look at the surely and look at the logic because the law says it's that.
Correct. And unless the law gets changed,
that's where we sit. So, for all of those who are trying to find a way around it, it's that's why it doesn't actually work. So, talking about SBRs, as we say, the legislation is, nearly 25 years old or 24 years old. So they didn't think about SBRs. So that allows you a level of discretion now. And
correct.
And then obviously for smaller builders. That are in a bit of strife, that's welcome relief that they can actually use insolvency legislation and help them get themselves back sorted. Is there a set of criteria where you're going, because it's still your discretion, I understand, so you can still cancel a license or suspend a license even if they do go into an SBR and come out. What do you have guidelines that you're working to there, or is it a little bit rubbery to ask that question?
No, definitely not rubbery. And we would like to think that we're a transparent regulator. When the SBRs were first introduced, what was that, 2021, I think, from memory? We had a look, and obviously it's not captured by the current legislation, so that put us in a grey area. We decided to apply a pragmatic view, and who would have thought a regulator would actually be pragmatic, right? But we thought that's where our role lies. So because there are, it's capped at $1 million of creditors, there's not actually that many larger licensees that would have less than $1 million, so lower risk. We fall into that lower risk category, as well as fortunately or unfortunately, the facts say that 95% of SBRs that we see across our desks are solely ATO creditor. There's not subcontractors, there's not suppliers at stake. Most of the time it's ATO. We take the view, sucks to be ATO, but they're big, they can handle that. So we then, we acknowledge that an SBR has been proposed. Who are we to come in and sweep that out from under the knees of the licensee and those creditors? We will then say, can we have a copy of the proposal of the SBR? Can we have a copy once it's accepted by the creditors? If it is accepted by the creditors, we say, that's great, that they've done what they need to do. If they're happy with it, we're happy with it. We'll then do our tests and checks, which we would normally do. Are there any defective works? Are there any monies owed complaints? Is there any risk to the industry? If there is none of that, we will sit merrily and wait until that SBR has been finalised at the conclusion of that. We will then ensure that the financial requirements are met after the SBR has been finalised.
Okay, so that's really, so if their ratios are out during the SBR, that's a different issue for you. So
we'll apply discretion to that.
Okay, so it's you apply discretion. Okay.
Yeah. So out of I think we're getting around about 30 appointments a quarter for our licensees.
Yep.
Out of them, I think we've taken action. We've batted on with regulatory action on 2. So it's quite slim. It's quite small of the ones where we say, that's great, but we've recognised there's some stuff going on here that we really need to act on. So regardless of the SBR, we'll bat on.
Yep.
2 out of 30. I actually think it might have been out of a financial year, out of 60, we've batted on with 2. So quite rare. We'll usually apply that pragmatic view and say we sit on the back burner.
which is really good. I mean, if I look at some of the stats that are out there at the moment in terms of construction businesses in the last 12 months that have gone under, and it's general knowledge that there's been quite a lot. 65% of them were less than 5 staff in size. So there's probably a whole lot more that fit in that area that have gone into insolvency. 65% of all construction businesses that have gone insolvent have been under 5 staff. So a lot of them would fit in that smaller space. So,
and if they can come out the other end, that's a win, isn't it? That's great for the industry. They remain in business. Those employees remain employed. We would put the disclaimer on that though, and there is talk of a number of different agencies agitating to the federal government to lift the cap from $1 million to 10 million.
Yeah.
We'll apply a different view. $10 million of creditors changes our landscape substantially.
Yeah. I'd be surprised if SBRs get that high, but who knows? But there's nothing proposed yet. There's just a lot of talk about
a lot of talk, correct. Yeah.
I think once you get up to 10 mil, it turns very much into looking a lot more of VA.
And perhaps that's why it's being agitated to fit that gap.
Yeah.
But although we may not be covered by the law, our pragmatic view would likely change.
Okay. And I mean, you don't know until it happens, but wherever that scale fits will be when you work out where you sit.
Correct. We'll bat the ball that's bowled to us at the moment, $1 million, quite low risk.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So the other thing that I wanted to talk about is you talk about irrelevant events and the whole insolvency, and again, I understand it more just purely on the conversation about it's legislated as such, but as an example of where it can, I feel, almost be too harsh, is that I had a client, this is going back 9 or 10 years ago, had a building license, but his wife decided she wanted to open up an ice cream shop. Unfortunately, he became a director of that company that had the ice cream shop. The ice cream shop failed, and because of that, that company had to go into liquidation. So therefore, he was a director that had a liquidated event.
Of the ice cream shop?
Yeah.
The law's changed now.
Okay. So
it's of a construction company.
Right. So back then he lost his license. When did that law change, just out of interest?
2014,
okay.
2017.
Yeah, well, as David, it's nearly 10 years ago that I had this issue with a client. So I'm glad I brought it up because I still talk about that being a risk. So, okay, so the prescribed event must be if they're a director of a company, of a construction company.
Construction company, correct.
If they've had that, they're out for 3 years.
Correct.
On one event.
Yeah. Second event out for life.
Right. So, and that again, very harsh.
Very.
That's legislated. That's not something that's got any discretion.
Yep. And I'll give you a real live case study. If you're in Queensland, you may have seen the news on Monday that Stokes-Wheeler appointed administrators. I've personally dealt with the directors of Stokes-Wheeler over the last little while. That is a great shame. That company's been in business for that particular company 30 years, and I think Mr. Wheeler, his father, actually started the business. They appear to be really prudent business people. They know what they're doing. That is really, I find that really upsetting, that company has seen that outcome. Unfortunately, Mr. Wheeler and Mr. Stokes are going to be on the naughty chair for 3 years, and there is absolutely nothing we can do about that.
Yeah. Okay.
So some really are. I don't get any pleasure out of this particular case. There are others where I think, yeah, you've been insolvent for a fair while and you're doing some harm to the industry. I don't have a lot of empathy there. There are some where you think, oh, that's just heartbreaking.
Yeah. And leading to that second event, so I know in our experience, if a business does go into liquidation, there's often a lot of personal guarantees and all that sort of stuff, which often then leads to the bankruptcy of the director. and they're obviously out for 3 years, in my mind, it's the same event.
Correct.
But
Then the changes to the law recently
allow that
establishes
as
that
well.
now.
Okay,
Yeah.
all right.
So if you are a director of a liquidation or an administration of a company, that's one event, you're out for 3. If that has caused you to have a personal insolvency, whether it's a Part 9, Part 10 or bankruptcy, because of those personal guarantees, or you can link it back to the circumstances of the company going insolvent, they're classed as one event, not 2.
So that
Similar to if the other one would be you appoint an administrator and it ends up in liquidation, still one event.
that's what,
Or 2 events, yeah.
that one I sort of accept as it's part of the same process, but
Yeah.
okay, awesome. So I said I'd hold the questions, but I think this is one that's relevant to what we're talking about now, and that is that are there restrictions on companies such as Stokes Wheeler then operate? So I'll paraphrase this because there are. So the restriction is, can those directors, can they work in companies where their spouse or family members take over as directors? How does
That's a
the
great
path roll
question.
through?
There is absolutely nothing against the law for Mr. Stokes or Mr. Wheeler, using them as the examples, for their wives to incorporate a company and for it to be licensed. The only excluded people in this scenario is Mr. Stokes and Mr. Wheeler. They can't be influential in any new company. They can be employed by through a new entity, but they can't be influential in the business dealings of that new entity. So they can't be a significant shareholder. They can't hold the position of CEO. They can't be giving instructions to employees about who to pay, when to pay, those sort of things. But they can definitely be an employee.
So, and then it just comes down to, I guess, a combination of the perception and what they actually do, because most people would assume that if Mr. Wheeler's working for his wife's company, that he has a certain involvement, and you've just got to be mindful of how he plays that game.
I could almost guarantee you, if you spoke to Mrs. Wheeler, she would say, he's doing everything on my authority.
Yeah.
I'm instructing him to do stuff as an employee.
Yeah.
It's a very difficult law to navigate that influential person part.
I have no doubt.
I hope that answered Kate's question. I can see that there. I hope that answered Kate's question.
Yes, yeah. If Kate's got more, please just put another one in if we haven't quite got it answered to there. In terms of your outlook looking forward, with obviously what you're seeing and with the financial reporting, the construction industry, as we've talked about and has been in the press, has been under enormous pressure and was the highest insolvency industry. It's pretty much been overtaken now by hospitality and retail. And my personal opinion is I anticipate that will happen again this year, that hospitality will continue to grow, but it's still considered a relatively high risk industry, construction. So, and has been for 20 years, really.
I don't think that risk will ever go away.
No. And that comment, I guess, leads me away from the question. What is it that makes it such a high risk industry from your point of view?
Building.
Sorry. Well, I think we're having a moment with the internet. Natasha, are you with me?
Yep.
We're back. Yep. Okay, cool.
I don't know if that was my end or your end. Probably my end.
Not sure, but we'll hope it goes away. So
okay.
Yeah.
It's just come up with your internet connection is unstable. Hope that's not a reflection of this discussion.
I'm sure it's more the rain outside.
So yes, to answer that question, biggest asset that you'll likely own and likely finance for. It's also one of the industries where you don't get what you pay for up front. I can walk into a coffee shop, pay my $5 and get the coffee straight away. For a house, if you're building a house, you don't get that finished product until 6, 8, 12 months later, a lot can happen in that time. And most licensees aren't doing just one house. They'll do 3, 4, 5 houses that can impact the house that you're building. So there's a little bit of risk there. A lot of money flows through the industry.
Yeah, okay. And your outlook, do you think that we're sort of getting to the end of the really bad stuff and it'll just go back to normal construction risk, or do you still see that there's a high risk area for the next 6 to 9 months or 12 months?
I'll rely on my colleagues from ATO for that answer. QBCC forms part of the ATO Phoenix Task Force, which is made up of a lot of regulators like ASIC, ATO, all our counterparts in New South Wales, Victoria. ATO has said, and I think they're very much on the money, we won't see an increase, but we won't see any change from what we've got right now. So it's not going to decrease, it's going to stay about the same. And I think that's what we're seeing at the moment.
Yeah, for your industry, or that's coming from the
through the construction industry.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's. I think you're almost going to go back to what's almost considered your annual average. Yeah.
Normal. Yeah. I mean, and I don't know what inference to draw from this. For the month of January that we've just seen, we've had 4 insolvencies. Usually we would see a spike straight after Christmas because people, their cash flows dried up. They've gone to Tahiti for Christmas and spent all their jet ski money. We haven't seen a mass exodus from the industry over that Christmas period. So, yeah.
Yeah, from my experience, we find that starts happening in February. I know that normally there are numbers in January because I think people try to hide it through while everyone's on holidays. But we find the real jump starts coming in February because the December BAS isn't due till February. So, just in our normal business stuff, not only construction, we've certainly had a massive increase in phone calls in the last couple of weeks because people realise their BASs are coming up. How
am I going to pay that?
They've had the extra holiday. We've had stories coming from some of my staff of clients who are in all sorts of mischief coming back from holidays in Utah and all that sort of stuff. So they come back and they go, "Oh, I can't afford that holiday."
Now I can't pay my subcontractors.
So there's all sorts of issues that start to flow after Christmas. And I think there's always an optimism about going, let's just see what happens after Christmas. And when they come back and realise nothing's changed, that's when it all starts to kick in.
Yeah. And I think that's part of where our role lays as well, with the education piece to the industry, that you're not just waiting from December to February. You've actually got some insight into your business at least 6 months prior to that. And we would say to licensees, go on a journey, be in a relationship with your accountant. Because if you've seen your gross profit margin drop from 20% to 4%, is someone picking that up over each quarter for it to drop from 40% or 20% to 4%? Or are you only picking that up every 12 months? Because that's probably not a good way to run a good business.
No, well, and that's, again, there's a whole lot. When you look at the large number of insolvencies, less than 5 staff, there's a lot of those people who have gone, I was working for a builder and I know they're charging me out at $150 an hour, but they're only paying me 50. Why don't I go and do it on my own? And they don't realise just how much work goes into,
which is great, but you've got to have that infrastructure around you to support that. And I say it all the time. If you're running and you've got all the tools of business, you've got your hammers and your scaffolding and all of that sort of stuff, make sure you've got 2 other things in your back pocket: a good lawyer and a good accountant. Hopefully you won't need one. You will always need the other. You will always need a good accountant in your back pocket.
Yeah. Well, I'm sure everyone listening here is saying that you would all agree, but getting people to hear it and believe it is the hard.
Leading that horse to water. Yeah.
All right. So I will. We've sort of covered everything that we wanted to, and we've got a couple of minutes for questions. So if anyone does have any questions, please put them in the chat box. Janelle's got a quick one here. Individual tradies, electricians included in regulations.
Electricians, no. All the other trades, yes. So bricklayers, carpenters, concreters, swimming pools, all of them are classed as trade contractors, yes. Electrician, no. Excavators, no. Demolition work, no. So there are a few exemptions to that, but rather than rely on my words, if you want to jump onto QBCC's website, you'll see which ones are exempt. Probably safer.
I was about to say, even I know that the electricians, yes, but they're a special exemption.
Plumbers would like to say they are also, but unfortunately they're still captured by us.
There are, and there's I've seen a number of TikTok things talking about how electricians are think they're very special on the outside as well. Okay, well, there doesn't, unless they're typers like me that take a while for typing to type a question, doesn't appear to be a lot more coming through. I really want to thank you, Natasha. It's been very insightful. It's certainly, even for 15 years where I've been dealing with companies in financial crisis and all the rest of it, and dealing with a lot of QBCC stuff, it's been very enlightening for me. And I hope that's the same for everyone listening today. So thank you. It's been a great pleasure having you along. I really have enjoyed it. And as I say, the big thing is about I can't tell you how many times in the last 15 years I've said, surely they can see the logic of a VA and a docker. But there's you don't.
We need to convince the people above us to see that logic.
Very much so.
Logic and law doesn't always combine there, Ashley.
No,
sometimes, yeah.
We all know that the laws can be a real pain in the bum to actually work through. So thank you. We will put up a survey for everyone. Again, we appreciate you all attending this special event and outside our normal cycle. We do have our webinar again later this month. Look out for the invites for that. We'll be back to talking about a lot more of the pure insolvency stuff and what's going on in the marketplace. As I've alluded to, there's been a lot happen already this year. But to finish up, Natasha, thank you. Do you have any final words for everyone listening?
Thank you for having me, most importantly. If anyone does have any questions, please reach out. I'm happy to take them offline if you need to. And yeah, please don't share around the industry that we're pragmatic, because that can give us a bad reputation.
And very quickly, there was a question here. Are you saying that there's a possibility to apply discretion to SBRs for licenses under a certain limit? So Darren, yes, there is discretion in terms of working out what they do. You don't automatically lose your license.
Correct. I would say it's more than a possibility. We apply discretion on every single one of them.
There you go. Yeah. All right. Well, thank you, Natasha. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. Have a wonderful day.
Happy Thursday.
Happy Thursday. Absolutely. All right.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Bye.